The night my world shattered started with a knock I never expected, sharp and deliberate, echoing through the hollow hall of our family home. My brother Ryan stood at the doorway, eyes cold, smirk tugging at the corners of his lips as he told me I had an hour to leave, my stomach dropping as if gravity itself had betrayed me, and just before I could speak, he laughed as though every memory of our childhood had been a cruel joke played at my expense. Only if this story speaks to your heart, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me your city or country and the local time there, because every moment of this matters more than just me. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and that night, the night I was forced to pack my life into boxes under the weight of my parents' absence and my brother's cruelty, changed everything in our family forever, setting in motion a chain of betrayal and humiliation that would unfold in ways I never imagined. Before that night, I had no reason to believe my own blood could turn on me so completely, yet here I was, cradling photos of my parents, trying to decide which memories to keep and which to abandon as Ryan's laughter cut through the hall like ice, while the faint scent of my mother's perfume lingered in the air, a reminder that she would never see the cruelty that her own son now inflicted. As I folded shirts into my old army duffel, the one I had carried through deployments and training that demanded everything of me, I felt a mix of disbelief and deep sorrow. My family, the people who had raised me, had disappeared in all but name, leaving only my brother's cold calculation and the echo of my parents' absence to fill the silence. Each item I packed was a tiny betrayal, a moment where I realized that the home I once thought was untouchable was now just four walls and memories. And outside those walls, the world seemed indifferent to the pain I carried. The night stretched on with a cruel sense of finality, my neighbor's windows casting faint glows that mocked my sudden homelessness, while Ryan barked orders to my moving boxes like a general commanding troops, oblivious to the fact that I had once commanded units in the army, faced fear on foreign soil, and yet could not command my own family to treat me with decency. As I stepped out into the crisp air, the streetlights painting long shadows across the driveway, I felt a wave of humiliation so acute it burned in my chest, a feeling compounded by the knowledge that our parents' passing had left me vulnerable to the very person who should have protected me as a sibling. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Ryan, standing at the threshold of our shattered home, still had the audacity to chuckle, waving his hand in a dismissive farewell, as though I were nothing more than an inconvenient guest in the story of our lives. That moment, standing alone in the dark with the echo of laughter chasing me down the street, crystallized a truth I could no longer ignore. The family I thought I knew was fractured, and I would have to navigate a world where loyalty and love were conditional, often absent, and sometimes weaponized against me. That night, I realized my own strength would be tested not on the battlefield, but within the very bonds I had trusted all my life. And as I drove away from the house I had grown up in, the city lights of our small town fading behind me, I allowed myself a brief, bitter laugh at the absurdity of it all, knowing that somehow, some way, this was where my true journey began, the night that turned the past into a prelude, setting the stage for every struggle and revelation that was to come. The morning after I was forced out of the house, I woke to the distant hum of traffic and the faint smell of rain lingering in the air, my rented studio apartment feeling smaller than it should have, walls closing in with the weight of solitude, each corner echoing the absence of family and the betrayal I had just endured. I set my suitcase by the bed, unzipping it slowly, careful with each photograph, each keepsake from a life that had been abruptly severed, and I could not help but run my fingers over the worn edges of my father's old leather-bound journal, remembering how he used to say that honesty and integrity would carry me farther than wealth or power ever could. The streets below were quiet, almost eerily so, but the memories of Ryan's laughter at the doorway haunted me, a sound more cutting than any sharp word, and I caught myself gripping the edge of the table to steady my shaking hands, realizing that the true battle I faced was not against the world, but against the people I had once trusted most. I made coffee in a chipped mug that had been a gift from my first deployment, the aroma grounding me in a moment of calm, yet my mind raced with questions about what had driven Ryan to such cruelty, whether it was greed, resentment, or simply a twisted sense of superiority, and I could not shake the feeling that every decision I had made in my life, every sacrifice, every choice to put duty and family first, had led me to this precise moment of profound humiliation and loss. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with the city or country where you are watching and what time it is there, because sharing these moments makes them real for all of us who have felt alone in the face of family betrayal. My name is Emily Carter. I am 32 years old, and this morning marked the beginning of a week that would test my resilience in ways I had never imagined, forcing me to confront the depths of familial disloyalty while finding small pockets of strength in routines that reminded me I could still control something, even if just the simple act of making a cup of coffee. I dressed in my uniform, crisp and sharp, a reminder of the person I had been before my world fractured, and as I walked to the small mirror by the window, I studied my reflection, the lines of stress and exhaustion etched on my face, and I reminded myself that I had faced adversity before, that I had survived deployments where fear was constant, and yet I had returned, and perhaps, just perhaps, I could survive this too, even if it came from within my own family. The streets of the town outside were beginning to stir, the early sun casting long shadows over the sidewalk, and I felt a pang of loneliness as I realized I had no one to share this victory or this defeat with, no one who truly understood the shock of betrayal I carried. And yet, there was a strange clarity in the isolation, a kind of cold truth that made me understand exactly what needed to be done next, how I would navigate the treacherous waters of inheritance, loyalty, and revenge, if one could call it that. I reached for my laptop, scanning the list of contacts I could reach, allies in the legal field, friends who had always been honest with me, and even a few old colleagues who might offer advice on navigating difficult family dynamics. And as each name appeared on the screen, a small ember of hope sparked inside me, a feeling that maybe this was not the end, but the beginning of reclaiming what had been wrongfully taken, fueling a quiet determination to not just survive but to assert the dignity that had been stripped from me. And in that moment, I realized that the humiliation I had endured could become the very tool to sharpen my resolve, that each cruel word, each sneer, each public mockery could be transformed into a stepping stone toward justice. I made a plan, not out of malice, but from a place of necessity, mapping out the steps I would take to attend the will reading with the calm authority of someone who knew their own worth, someone who understood that the world and family could be cruel, but that did not mean I had to yield to that cruelty. Every detail mattered: the outfit that conveyed professionalism and composure, the timing of my arrival, the subtle gestures that would signal my presence and resilience without inviting further scorn. And as I rehearsed these small details in the mirror, I felt a surge of control, a reminder that although I had been cast out, my agency was not lost, and I could navigate the coming storm with poise and strategy. That afternoon, I stepped out of the apartment and felt the brisk wind brush against my face, carrying with it the faint scent of wet asphalt and autumn leaves, and I knew that this day, this step into the unknown, was a quiet declaration that I would not be defeated, that I would reclaim my place, not through confrontation, but through the unyielding assertion of truth and presence. As I walked past familiar streets that now seemed strange and hostile, I thought about the faces of my parents, about the lessons they had instilled in me, and I felt the first flicker of resolve grow into a steady flame, a certainty that the events of the previous night, though devastating, had also revealed a path forward, one in which I would emerge, not broken but stronger, and that realization carried me to the threshold of what could only be described as the first turning point of a long and intricate journey that would test every ounce of patience, courage, and intellect I possessed, setting the stage for the unfolding drama that was only just beginning to reveal itself in the aftermath of betrayal and loss. By mid-afternoon, the small studio felt more like a sanctuary than a temporary refuge, the muted light filtering through half-closed blinds casting long stripes across the floor, and I found myself sitting at the tiny kitchen table, staring at a notebook filled with my thoughts, trying to untangle the knot of emotions that Ryan's betrayal had left behind, each memory of our shared childhood colliding with the cruel reality of his actions in a way that made my chest tighten and my mind whirl. I pored over every detail I could remember about that night, the way he had laughed as I gathered my belongings, the mocking tone in which he had dismissed my questions, and the image of my parents' faces flashed in my mind, Bittersweet reminders that they would never know the extent of his disloyalty or the humiliation he had inflicted upon me. And yet, even in the midst of this deep sorrow, I felt the first stirrings of a plan, a quiet resolve that had nothing to do with revenge, but everything to do with reclaiming the dignity that had been stripped from me. The phone rang, startling me from my reverie, and it was an old colleague from the army, someone I trusted implicitly, offering words of encouragement and reminding me that discipline, strategy, and composure had always been my greatest strengths. And as we spoke, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease, replaced by a growing sense of control over what had felt like an uncontrollable situation. A realization that my training had prepared me not just for physical challenges, but for navigating treacherous personal terrain as well. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to leave a comment with your city or country and the local time, because sharing these moments connects us in ways that words alone cannot convey. I returned to my notes, listing every person who might influence the upcoming reading, from lawyers to family, friends, and I considered how each interaction could be used to maintain my composure while asserting my rightful presence, envisioning the room where the will would be read, the faces that would stare in surprise, and the quiet but undeniable authority I could project simply by existing as a calm, unshakable witness to the unfolding events. I thought about Ryan, pacing in his expensive suit, confident in his assumptions, unaware that the world, or at least the room full of family, could see through his facade. And I felt a mixture of pity and determination, knowing that his overconfidence could work in my favor if I approached the situation with precision and care. As the hours passed, I prepared my outfit meticulously, choosing a tailored jacket that suggested both authority and elegance, a subtle reminder to anyone who might underestimate me that I was not the same person they had thought they could dismiss. And I practiced small gestures in the mirror, a steady hand, a calm nod, a brief but meaningful smile, each movement rehearsed to communicate confidence without arrogance, resilience without hostility. Afternoon turned to evening, and the streets outside were bathed in the soft orange glow of the setting sun, the distant sounds of children playing and cars moving through the quiet town blending with the soft hum of my refrigerator and the occasional chirp of birds settling in for the night, creating a sense of normalcy that contrasted sharply with the storm of family politics I anticipated. And yet it was, in this contrast, that I found clarity, the stillness allowing me to organize my thoughts and prepare for the performance of patience, strategy, and composure that would be required. I wrote letters in advance, careful words meant to remind certain relatives of past commitments, kindnesses overlooked, and obligations that had been assumed, not as threats, but as quiet markers of presence and memory, a way of establishing that I had a claim not just to material inheritance but to recognition and respect. And in doing so, I felt a subtle strengthening of my resolve, a preparation of both mind and spirit for the confrontation ahead. By nightfall, I stepped onto the balcony, the cool wind brushing my face as I looked up at the sky, stars beginning to prick the darkening canvas above, and I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection, imagining the faces of my parents and the life lessons they had instilled in me, lessons of integrity, courage, and composure in the face of adversity, and I promised myself that I would embody those lessons fully, using them as armor and guidance in the days to come. I practiced calm breathing, envisioning scenarios in the will reading room, imagining the subtle shifts in posture and expression I could use to maintain control and convey strength, and as I moved through these mental rehearsals, I felt a sense of inevitability settle over me, the certainty that although the path ahead would not be simple or free from discomfort, I could navigate it successfully with patience, grace, and unwavering focus. Each thought, each preparation, reinforced the quiet assertion that this moment, though forced upon me by betrayal and cruelty, could become a pivotal point in reclaiming my dignity, a space where humiliation could transform into authority and doubt into clarity, setting the stage for a confrontation where my presence alone would command respect and signal that the power I carried was not defined by others, but by my own composure and resolve. As I finally sat back in my chair, watching the fading light and feeling the calm strength grow within me, I understood that this was not merely about the will or the inheritance. It was about proving to myself that no act of betrayal could diminish the essence of who I was, that the foundation my parents had built in me, strength, integrity, and the ability to face adversity remained intact, unshaken, and ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead, quietly, deliberately, and with unyielding resolve. The next morning, the sky was overcast, a soft gray veil stretching across the town, and the air carried the faint scent of damp leaves as I prepared myself for the journey to the law office where the reading would take place. Each step a deliberate act to maintain composure and steady my heartbeat, which still raced from the events of the previous night. The drive through familiar streets felt surreal, the buildings and houses I had known my entire life now appearing almost alien, as if they were complicit witnesses to the betrayal I had endured. And with each turn, I rehearsed in my mind the calm, measured words I would use, the subtle gestures that would assert my presence without inviting confrontation, and the image of Ryan standing smugly at the doorway of our family home replayed relentlessly in my thoughts, fueling a quiet determination that this encounter would not leave me diminished. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your city or country and the local time, because these moments connect us in ways that nothing else can. Upon arriving at the office, I noticed the subtle tension in the air, the faint shuffle of feet, and the hushed whispers among the other family members gathered, their faces a mix of expectation, curiosity, and concealed judgments. And as I stepped into the room, the polished floors reflected the muted lighting, highlighting the meticulous arrangement of chairs and the imposing desk where the lawyer, a calm and methodical man named Mr. Hawthorne, would preside over the reading. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my parents' legacy pressing down on me, the invisible yet palpable reminder that their lives, their decisions, and their hopes for fairness now rested upon the events that were about to unfold, and I reminded myself that dignity, patience, and precision were my allies, far more powerful than anger or indignation, even though the sting of betrayal still lingered in every nerve. Ryan, standing near the center of the room, looked over at me, his smirk unchanged, his confidence unshaken, and I could see the subtle nods of our extended family, many of whom were clearly entertained by the unfolding drama, unaware that the true turning point had yet to arrive, and that appearances could be deceiving when composure and strategy were employed with care. I approached the designated seat, each movement measured, projecting calm while internally cataloging every interaction, every potential interruption, and every gaze that might attempt to sway the outcome, understanding that this reading was not just a legal formality, but a stage upon which power, respect, and acknowledgement would be tested and revealed. And the very act of occupying the space with integrity and presence was itself a quiet but undeniable assertion of authority. As the lawyer began the formalities, the room grew still, the air thick with anticipation, and I noticed the subtle shifts in posture, the small glances exchanged, the barely perceptible tightening of jaws, all indicating that the attention of the room was now fully focused, and that my presence, silent yet assertive, had begun to recalibrate the dynamics in subtle but critical ways. I felt the familiar rhythm of breathing and focus that had guided me through countless military operations reassert itself, the clarity of mind that allows one to assess situations objectively and act with precision even under pressure, and I realized that the lessons I had carried from my career were proving invaluable here, providing a strategic advantage in a scenario that was emotionally charged, unpredictable, and filled with latent tension. Each page that Mr. Hawthorne turned, each name announced, each minor detail read aloud, was absorbed with acute attention, and I noticed Ryan's expressions flicker slightly, subtle signs of impatience or irritation that contrasted with the unwavering composure I maintained, and these micro-changes in demeanor began to create a sense of momentum in my favor, a realization that control could be exerted simply by maintaining poise and presence. I felt the quiet satisfaction of small victories as the lawyer proceeded, knowing that every careful observation and deliberate decision I made in the room would accumulate, shaping the eventual outcome, and as the reading approached its climactic moment, the tension built in a layered crescendo, a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and the silent acknowledgement of power, the room collectively holding its breath, waiting for the revelation that would inevitably disrupt the carefully constructed facades and expectations. I reminded myself to remain composed, to project calm confidence, to let the weight of history, preparation, and dignity speak for itself, And as the final pages were shuffled, I could sense the subtle shift in atmosphere, the unspoken understanding among the family that something unexpected was about to be revealed, a quiet prelude to the transformation that was poised to unfold. And in that moment, the hours of preparation, reflection, and resolve coalesced into a single point of clarity, a readiness to witness and embrace the turning of events, fully aware that the equilibrium of family dynamics and the assertion of rightful presence would soon be tested and revealed. The room was hushed as the lawyer carefully turned the penultimate page, his expression neutral but attentive, and I felt a subtle tightening in my chest, the anticipation building like a low hum that resonated through every fiber of my being. While Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a faint frown crossing his face, as though sensing that the carefully constructed hierarchy he had relied upon was beginning to falter. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your city or country and the local time, because moments like these, shared, give weight to the invisible struggles many endure. I kept my posture straight, shoulders back, my hands resting lightly in my lap, observing every detail of the room, the subtle exchange of glances between extended family members, the small coughs, the whispered remarks that traveled just beyond the edges of polite conversation, each a minor vibration in the tense atmosphere that made the room feel charged with unspoken expectations. The air seemed thicker with each passing second, the soft ticking of a clock on the wall accentuating the stretch of time as the lawyer finally hesitated for a fraction of a heartbeat, looking down at the final page, and the silence became almost unbearable, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the revelation that would shift the balance of power and redefine the unspoken hierarchy that Ryan had assumed was untouchable. My thoughts raced, each memory of the past mingling with strategic calculations for the present, and I realized that this moment, seemingly ordinary, had been shaped by years of preparation, endurance, and quiet observation, and that every choice I had made since being cast out had led me to this precise juncture, where presence alone could command authority and dignity. The lawyer finally spoke, his voice measured, deliberate, each word clear and resonant, announcing my name in a manner that made the room pivot subtly, the weight of recognition settling on everyone present, and I felt a surge of clarity and quiet triumph as I realized that my parents' intentions, long obscured by assumption and expectation, were now unmistakably clear, and that the inheritance, both symbolic and tangible, belonged to me. The reactions were immediate yet varied. Ryan froze, his confidence replaced with visible shock. The smirk wiped from his face as the reality of my rightful claim struck him like an invisible force, and I noticed subtle gestures from others, a shift in posture, widening eyes, suppressed murmurs, all reinforcing the impact of the revelation, while I remained calm, letting the significance of the moment speak through composure rather than confrontation. I could see Margaret, my stepmother, stiffening, a thin smile faltering as she registered that her assumptions had been flawed, and the quiet authority of the lawyer amplified the legitimacy of the declaration, creating a ripple effect through the room where power and respect had been momentarily misaligned, but were now being corrected through the assertion of truth and rightful recognition. As the lawyer continued to outline the specific allocations and stipulations, each detail reinforced the new balance, the precise language affirming the ownership and rights I had always been entitled to, and I felt the culmination of years of strategy and patience crystallize into a singular, undeniable moment of vindication that carried with it both emotional and practical weight. The room remained attentive, the tension transforming gradually into a complex mixture of astonishment, acknowledgement, and reflection, and I observed how subtle the shift was, yet how profound. The change in perception, anchored not by dramatic confrontation, but by deliberate, undeniable presence, the kind that commands recognition through calm authority rather than loud assertion. I allowed myself a slow, measured breath, absorbing the depth of the transformation in the room, the rebalancing of dynamics, and the silent understanding that my actions, composure, and preparation had created a turning point that no one could disregard, not even Ryan, whose previous confidence now seemed fragile and exposed. Each phrase, Each confirmation of the will's provisions reinforced my place and authority, a quiet assertion of dignity that contrasted sharply with the earlier chaos, and I recognized that this moment would resonate beyond the immediate gathering, establishing clarity, respect, and recognition that could not easily be undone. As the lawyer closed the folder and set it aside, the room exhaled collectively, the tension dissipating into a mixture of relief, astonishment, and acknowledgement, and I felt a profound sense of completion, the culmination of strategy, resilience, and patient endurance realized fully, not through conflict, but through the assertion of truth and presence that could not be ignored. I looked around, noting the subtle recalibration of relationships, the expressions of quiet amazement, and the recognition that while the past could not be changed, the present had been decisively shaped by honesty, preparation, and dignity. And in that realization, I found a deep and abiding sense of vindication and clarity that would guide my actions in the family and beyond, affirming that composure, patience, and strategic presence could achieve more than confrontation or anger ever could, solidifying a lasting sense of authority, respect, and balance. After the will reading concluded and the lawyer stepped back, I remained seated, absorbing the quiet chaos that had replaced the tense anticipation, noticing Ryan slumping in his chair, his earlier arrogance replaced by disbelief, and a subtle murmur running through the room as family members began processing the unexpected turn of events, some glancing at me with a mix of surprise and newfound respect, while others exchanged private looks, perhaps silently recalculating their assumptions about loyalty, authority, and entitlement. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your city or country and the local time, because sharing these moments connects us across experiences of betrayal and triumph. I allowed myself a slow exhale, the sensation of control settling over me in a wave that was both exhilarating and grounding, and I realized that the careful preparation, the patient endurance, and the disciplined composure I had cultivated over the past week had not only preserved my dignity, but subtly shifted the balance of perception in the room, signaling that resilience and quiet authority carried weight beyond confrontation. Ryan's eyes met mine briefly, a flicker of shame and perhaps grudging acknowledgement passing in that instant, and I noticed my stepmother Margaret drawing herself slightly away, her thin smile faltering, as if she were silently admitting that her assumptions about dominance and influence had been misplaced, while other relatives leaned in, quietly attentive, aware that the unfolding reality challenged the hierarchy they had assumed for years. I scanned the room, committing each expression, each subtle change in posture and gaze to memory, understanding that these micro-reactions revealed far more than overt dialogue, that the true shifts in family dynamics often occur in small, unspoken gestures that, when observed carefully, can convey acknowledgement, regret, or admiration in ways words cannot fully capture. My focus shifted to the practical implications as well, the explicit confirmations of rights and responsibilities outlined in the will, and I felt a quiet satisfaction that the legal clarity complemented the emotional recalibration, reinforcing that preparation and patience could create outcomes that felt both just and inevitable when approached with integrity and composure. The air, once thick with tension, seemed lighter now, and I could hear faint acknowledgments exchanged in low tones, the room settling into a state of careful observation, with everyone present subconsciously adjusting to the altered distribution of influence and respect, and I allowed myself a brief mental nod, a recognition that I had succeeded not through force or argument, but by presence, strategy, and the patient assertion of rightful claim. As I stood to leave, the subtle shift in my posture and the deliberate calm in my movements conveyed a quiet confidence, a nonverbal declaration that I had weathered the storm of familial cruelty and emerged with dignity intact, and each step toward the exit reinforced the narrative of resilience and controlled authority I intended to maintain beyond the walls of the office. The drive back to my apartment offered time for reflection, the passing streets familiar yet now seen through the lens of recent triumph, the ordinary sights of the town, a bakery with its warm glow, children playing in a nearby park, leaves falling gently along sidewalks, imbued with a quiet sense of renewal, a contrast to the storm of emotions that had dominated the past days, and I felt a growing certainty that I could navigate the continuing complexities of family relationships with poise and strategic awareness. Once home, I unpacked the few personal items I had brought, the tactile familiarity of clothing, letters, and small keepsakes grounding me in the present. And I realized that the emotional weight of betrayal was not erased but transformed into a clear understanding of boundaries, responsibilities, and personal agency, a knowledge that would guide my interactions with Ryan, my stepmother, and the extended family moving forward. I made notes, thoughtful, precise, and unemotional, cataloging obligations, expectations, and potential interactions, preparing strategies for preserving my dignity while fostering respect where possible, and I felt the calm satisfaction of one who has turned adversity into insight, who recognizes the subtle power of presence and measured action in shifting outcomes. Evening descended, and as the fading sunlight filtered through the blinds, I allowed myself a quiet smile, the first in days, acknowledging that the events had not only revealed character and intentions, but had also reinforced my own strength, my capacity to endure, adapt, and emerge with clarity and confidence, and I felt a sense of forward momentum, knowing that the coming days would continue to test my composure and judgment, but with the assurance that resilience, patience, and strategic awareness would be my allies in every encounter. The room around me, simple and unadorned, became a space for reflection, planning, and quiet affirmation, the soft hum of the city outside, a reminder that life continued in its ordinary rhythm, even as my personal journey had shifted dramatically. And I embraced the knowledge that through careful observation, disciplined preparation, and calm presence, I could maintain control, assert my worth, and navigate the subtle complexities of family and inheritance with unshakable poise and dignity, ensuring that the past humiliations would not define me, but rather the integrity and strategy I carried forward would shape the narrative of respect, authority, and recognition in the family and beyond. The following morning, the sun broke through a thin layer of clouds, casting a soft glow across my apartment as I prepared for the first visit to the bank and legal offices to begin formalizing the inheritance, and I felt a quiet sense of purpose settle over me, each movement deliberate, each decision measured as I arranged my papers, checked addresses, and reviewed contact numbers, knowing that the steps I took now would solidify the clarity and authority established the day before. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your city or country and the local time, because these moments of triumph and clarity are made richer when shared with others who understand the value of resilience and dignity. As I walked to my car, the streets seemed different, not just familiar but subtly affirming, a reminder that the world continued to move and that my place within it, secured through patience and strategic presence, was now visible and recognized. And each pedestrian, each passerby, seemed like part of a background canvas against which my own story of assertion and reclamation played out. Ryan, likely still reeling from the reading, was a distant concern, more a symbol of the challenges overcome than an active adversary, and I allowed myself to consider how his assumptions, his overconfidence, and his previous dismissiveness had made him underestimate not only my resilience, but the quiet power that comes from preparation and integrity, lessons instilled by parents whose values guided every choice I made that morning. At the first office, the bank manager greeted me with polite recognition, the professional acknowledgement of my rightful authority in matters previously controlled by my brother, and as we walked through the documents, signatures, and procedural formalities, I felt a calm satisfaction, a quiet affirmation that competence and integrity had tangible effects beyond the emotional landscape of family, that structure, clarity, and patience translated into outcomes that were both legally secure and personally empowering. The process required attention to detail, observation of protocols, and subtle assertiveness, all of which I approached with a methodical focus, reviewing every form, confirming every authorization, and ensuring that all representations accurately reflected the intentions laid out in my parents' directives. And as I moved from the bank to the legal office, each small victory, each completed form, each acknowledgement reinforced the control and recognition I had established. The law office itself was quiet, its polished floors and organized desks, a stark contrast to the emotional turbulence that had characterized the week, and I felt the weight of procedural authority as I met with paralegals, clerks, and attorneys who acknowledged my presence and purpose, each interaction confirming that preparation, patience, and composure had created credibility that no previous conflict could undermine. I reviewed the final documents, checking names, allocations, and stipulations with precision, and I could sense the subtle shift in energy as each person I interacted with adjusted to the reality of the formalized outcome, the power of truth and rightful claim, manifesting in professional recognition that paralleled the emotional vindication of the will reading. With each signature, each notarization, and each confirmation, the sense of resolve within me deepened, a quiet confidence emerging that extended beyond the immediate circumstances, reinforcing my belief that integrity, strategy, and calm assertion could reshape even the most tense and uncertain of family dynamics, creating an atmosphere in which respect and acknowledgement were earned through action rather than assumed through position or prior familiarity. As I left the offices and stepped back onto the streets of my hometown, the late morning light casting long shadows along the sidewalks, I reflected on the transformation from the night I had been cast out to this point of legal and emotional empowerment, and I recognized the subtle but undeniable growth in both character and influence, a sense of agency that had been temporarily denied, but was now fully restored and formally recognized. Each encounter, each procedural step, and each acknowledgement of authority contributed to a cumulative sense of presence and validation, demonstrating that resilience, strategic foresight, and composed action could achieve outcomes that were simultaneously just, practical, and personally satisfying, solidifying the foundations of respect and recognition that would guide my interactions with family and community alike. Returning home, I felt the subtle relief of accomplishment mingled with anticipation, understanding that the upcoming interactions with relatives and family friends would now be framed by the undeniable clarity of the formalized outcome, a narrative reinforced by both procedural validation and personal composure, and I allowed myself a quiet moment to savor the tangible and symbolic victories secured through measured patience, preparation, and strategic awareness. As the afternoon light shifted across the walls, I considered the lessons reinforced through these experiences. That authority is established through presence, clarity, and action. That resilience manifests not only in endurance, but in careful observation and calculated engagement. And that dignity, patience, and strategic composure can transform betrayal, humiliation, and doubt into a foundation of empowerment and control, establishing a narrative that commands recognition and respect through calm yet unwavering assertion. The following day dawned bright and clear, a crisp autumn light filtering through the trees as I prepared to visit the local community center, where a few distant relatives and family friends were gathering to discuss the arrangements following the will reading. Each interaction a chance to observe, assert presence, and gauge reactions in a setting less formal but equally revealing of character and intention. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your city or country and the local time, because understanding how dignity and patience shape outcomes is something that resonates across experiences. As I walked down the familiar streets, the cool breeze carrying the scent of fallen leaves, I reflected on the subtle shifts that had already taken place. The cautious glances from relatives who had previously dismissed my presence, the softened expressions of family, friends who now acknowledged the quiet authority I had established, and the faint but unmistakable unease in Ryan's demeanor, a reminder that power and confidence can quickly falter when confronted by composure and rightful claim. Upon entering the community center, the warm chatter of familiar voices contrasted with the tension that still lingered beneath the surface, a delicate balance of curiosity, expectation, and the need to reconcile past assumptions with the unfolding reality, and I navigated the room with deliberate calm, offering measured greetings and observing every expression, posture, and subtle cue that indicated perception, attitude, and intent. I noticed Sophie, my younger sister, looking slightly relieved, her eyes betraying admiration for the quiet authority I had projected, while others nodded politely, acknowledging both my presence and the undeniable shift in dynamics that had occurred since the reading, and I felt a quiet sense of validation in knowing that dignity, patience, and strategic awareness had translated into recognition without overt confrontation. As conversations began to flow, I listened carefully, asking pointed but polite questions. guiding discussions with subtle precision to ensure that clarity, understanding, and respect were maintained. And I found that the more composed and attentive I remained, the more influence naturally aligned with my presence, creating a space where authority was recognized without the need for assertion or dominance. Ryan attempted to interject occasionally, his voice carrying traces of irritation and disbelief, but the calm manner in which I responded, acknowledging facts, maintaining eye contact, and deflecting any personal jabs, reinforced the shift in perception, allowing those present to see both the legitimacy of my position and the strength of composure in managing conflict without escalation. I observed the reactions carefully, noting small gestures, the straightening of backs, the subtle leaning forward, the soft murmurs of agreement that indicated alignment and acknowledgement, and I used these micro-reactions to navigate the room, ensuring that the momentum of recognition and respect remained steady, each interaction reinforcing the equilibrium I had worked to establish. Throughout the afternoon, I engaged in discussions regarding logistics, property, and family responsibilities, each exchange an opportunity to subtly guide outcomes while maintaining an air of neutrality and respect, demonstrating that control and authority could be exercised without confrontation through clarity, preparedness, and measured presence. The sunlight shifted, casting long patterns across the floor as the hours passed, and I felt a deep satisfaction, a quiet but profound understanding that the events unfolding were shaping not only practical arrangements, but also the perception and acknowledgement of character, influence, and dignity within the extended family network. A realization that every decision, every calm intervention, and every attentive observation contributed to a cumulative reinforcement of both respect and authority. As the gathering concluded, I left the community center with a sense of accomplishment, noting subtle acknowledgments, quiet nods, and the overall shift in the energy of the room, a confirmation that patience, composure, and strategic awareness had effectively transformed not only the immediate circumstances, but also the broader landscape of relationships, influence, and recognition within the family circle. Walking back through the streets, the afternoon sun warming my face and the scent of autumn leaves filling the air, I reflected on the journey from being cast out to establishing undeniable presence and authority, understanding that resilience, strategic observation, and composure had not only guided me through the immediate challenges, but had also set a foundation for continued respect and recognition. A reminder that the quiet assertion of dignity and prepared action often yields outcomes far more enduring and meaningful than confrontation or anger ever could, and that the path forward, though complex, was now navigable with clarity, purpose, and confidence. That evening, the sky over the town had turned a soft, dusky pink, the fading light spilling across the streets as I returned home after spending the afternoon consolidating documents and confirming arrangements, the quiet hum of the city, a soothing backdrop to the swirl of thoughts in my mind, each reflection reinforcing the subtle yet undeniable shift in authority and perception that had begun with the will reading. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your city or country and the local time, because observing how dignity and patience shape outcomes can connect us in ways that are hard to describe. As I stepped inside my apartment, the familiar creak of the door and the soft glow of the lamps created a comforting sense of return, yet my mind was alive with consideration of every encounter, every gesture, every word that had passed between relatives, legal advisors, and friends, each one contributing to the mosaic of acknowledgement and respect that was now quietly surrounding me. Ryan's earlier disbelief replayed in my memory, his smirk replaced by a faint tightening of the jaw, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes about the shift in power dynamics, and I realized that composure and preparation had created an invisible yet powerful presence that no outburst, argument, or public display could easily diminish. I poured myself a cup of tea, the warm aroma grounding me as I allowed my mind to catalog the events, considering the implications of each interaction, noting who had aligned with authority, who had wavered, and who remained neutral, all while understanding that the soft power of patience, observation, and strategic engagement had shifted perceptions more effectively than confrontation ever could. The quiet ticking of the clock punctuated my thoughts as I considered the broader landscape of family relationships, Understanding that the careful assertion of presence, paired with clarity and preparation, had established not only legal authority, but also an emotional and social recognition that would shape interactions for months to come, subtly reinforcing respect without the need for overt assertion. I thought about conversations at the community center, the nods of acknowledgement, the softened glances, and the small but meaningful smiles that indicated a new understanding of position, influence, and trust. Each moment reinforcing the narrative that resilience, strategic awareness, and composure had power beyond what words alone could convey, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the careful orchestration of presence had achieved results both tangible and perceptual. As I moved to my desk, reviewing notes and planning the next steps for property management and family communications, I felt the full weight of responsibility and the steady assurance that clarity, preparation, and careful action had created a foundation for continued influence, respect, and personal empowerment. And I reflected on the subtle but profound change in Ryan's demeanor, the recalibration of my stepmother, and the quiet acknowledgement of family friends who now saw me not as a distant relative, but as a central figure of authority and integrity. Evening deepened, the muted light casting long shadows across the floor as I considered the next phase, each decision calculated to maintain dignity, clarity, and the subtle assertion of presence, reinforcing that outcomes were shaped not only by the legal formalities, but also by the careful orchestration of observation, engagement, and composed action, and I felt a profound sense of accomplishment as I acknowledged the transformation that had begun with my measured responses and quiet patience. I reflected on the lessons learned through the unfolding events, understanding that influence and authority are often established in ways invisible to casual observation. That respect grows from composure and preparation rather than overt confrontation, and that true power resides in the ability to navigate complex emotional landscapes with clarity, patience, and deliberate presence, shaping outcomes through strategic engagement and subtle demonstration of integrity. With the apartment quiet around me, I allowed myself a brief moment to appreciate the depth of what had been accomplished, the reconciliation of legal authority, personal dignity, and social recognition, creating a harmony that had previously seemed unattainable, and I felt the first genuine sense of release since the chaos began, knowing that the careful application of patience, observation, and strategic composure had shifted the family dynamic in ways that would endure and continue to influence interactions and perceptions long into the future. As night settled fully, the stars beginning to prick the sky with faint light, I felt a quiet strength and clarity, understanding that the events, though challenging and painful, had reinforced the values instilled in me by my parents, the lessons of integrity, patience, and resilience, and that the path forward, though still demanding, was now illuminated with the steady assurance that careful action, calm presence, and strategic awareness could navigate even the most complex family dynamics with dignity and lasting influence, establishing a foundation for respect, acknowledgement, and empowerment that would shape the course of my relationships and decisions for years to come. The following morning brought a quiet clarity, the sunlight filtering gently through the blinds of my apartment as I prepared for the first family gathering since the will reading, a meeting that promised to solidify both the practical and emotional shifts that had begun to unfold, and I moved with deliberate calm, arranging notes, reviewing talking points, and mentally rehearsing interactions to ensure that every exchange would convey composure, authority, and respect. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your city or country and the local time, because witnessing how resilience and strategic presence shape relationships is a lesson that echoes far beyond one family. As I drove through the familiar streets, the crisp autumn air brushing against my face, I reflected on the subtle but profound change in dynamics since the will reading, noting that every careful decision, every measured response, and every instance of composed observation had begun to shift perceptions, gradually recalibrating expectations and influence among family members who had once assumed dominance and entitlement. Arriving at the house, I noticed the small but significant gestures of acknowledgement from those who had previously dismissed me, the polite yet unmistakable nods, the slight softening of expressions, and the quiet attention to my presence, all subtle indicators that the careful orchestration of composure and strategic engagement had created a foundation of recognition that extended beyond mere legal authority. The room was filled with the quiet hum of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter and the shifting of chairs, and I moved through the space with deliberate grace, acknowledging greetings with calm smiles, observing micro-expressions, and noting the subtle recalibration of body language, understanding that these small cues collectively spoke volumes about the shifting balance of respect, influence, and acknowledgement within the family. Ryan was present, seated slightly apart, his posture more guarded than I had ever observed, the faint tension in his shoulders and the wary glance of his eyes betraying his internal recalibration, while Margaret, my stepmother, maintained a carefully neutral demeanor, her earlier overconfidence tempered by the undeniable reality of the authority and recognition I now held, and the other relatives, some curious, some cautiously supportive, observed the unfolding dynamics with an awareness that the room itself had subtly shifted to reflect both reality and the quiet assertion of composure. I guided conversations with gentle precision, allowing others to speak while subtly steering discussions toward clarity, fairness, and acknowledgement of past misunderstandings, ensuring that every word reinforced dignity, patience, and strategic presence. And I observed with satisfaction the gradual alignment of respect and recognition without the need for confrontation, realizing that true influence was often most powerful when exercised quietly and thoughtfully. The afternoon passed with careful interactions, discussions of shared responsibilities, and subtle affirmations of roles and expectations, each moment reinforcing the legitimacy of my position and the cumulative effect of composure, preparation, and strategic observation. And I noticed the relief and acknowledgement on the faces of some family members, a quiet validation that had been earned through patience rather than assertion, through clarity rather than confrontation. As conversations concluded, I found moments of quiet reflection, observing the room with the satisfaction that the shifts in perception were tangible, the subtle but undeniable changes in how family members interacted with me, indicating that respect and acknowledgement had been firmly established, and that the careful cultivation of presence and integrity had transformed a scene that could have been defined by conflict into one of measured recognition and strategic equilibrium. Walking through the familiar rooms, noting the interplay of expressions, gestures, and tone, I reflected on the accumulation of small victories, the patient observation, the composed responses, the strategic interactions that had collectively redefined the narrative of family authority and respect, and I understood that the power of composure and measured engagement was not only practical but deeply psychological, influencing perceptions and relationships in ways that were subtle, enduring, and profoundly effective. The fading sunlight painted long shadows across the floors as I prepared to leave, each movement deliberate, each step a reinforcement of the calm authority I had established. And as I stepped outside into the crisp evening air, I felt a quiet but deep sense of accomplishment, the understanding that dignity, patience, and strategic presence had created outcomes that were both enduring and meaningful, shaping interactions and perceptions in ways that would continue to resonate, ensuring that the authority and recognition I had established were acknowledged, respected, and preserved, and that the subtle power of composed resilience could navigate even the most complex family dynamics with grace, clarity, and unwavering integrity. The morning light filtered gently through the blinds as I prepared to host the first private family meeting since the legal formalities had been completed, the quiet anticipation of the day settling over me as I carefully arranged documents, seating, and refreshments to ensure a calm, organized environment, understanding that every detail could influence both perception and interaction. Only if this story truly resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your city or country and the local time, because witnessing how strategy, patience, and composure shift family dynamics is a lesson in resilience and understanding. I moved through the rooms with deliberate attention, checking notes and confirming the agenda, ensuring that each family member would be acknowledged appropriately and that any lingering tensions could be addressed with tact and clarity, knowing that my composure and strategic planning would communicate authority as effectively as words could. Ryan arrived first, his posture slightly rigid, eyes flicking toward me with a mixture of curiosity and suppressed frustration, and I noted the subtle shift in his demeanor from confidence to cautious observation, a clear signal that the balance of power had been subtly but firmly recalibrated. Margaret, my stepmother, followed, her thin smile betraying a mix of apprehension and tentative acknowledgement, while other relatives entered quietly, some exchanging polite nods, some lingering near doorways to observe the unfolding scene, and I felt a calm satisfaction, knowing that the preparation and careful management of both environment and presence had begun to shape interactions in ways that would maintain dignity and foster respect. As we gathered around the large dining table, I guided the discussion with quiet authority, allowing each person to speak while subtly redirecting conversation toward practical matters and shared understanding, reinforcing the notion that recognition and respect could be maintained through patience, composure, and deliberate attention to detail, rather than confrontation or assertion of dominance. The air was filled with the soft murmur of conversation, occasional laughter, and the clinking of teacups, each sound punctuating the atmosphere with human warmth and subtle acknowledgement. And I observed micro-expressions with care, noting each flicker of surprise, tension, or tentative approval, understanding that these small cues often revealed the most about shifting perceptions, alliances, and attitudes. I made a conscious effort to maintain eye contact, nod in acknowledgement, and offer gentle but firm affirmations, each gesture reinforcing the quiet authority I carried and establishing a tone of calm yet undeniable leadership. And I could see the impact in the subtle straightening of posture, softening of expressions, and the careful modulation of tone from those present, all responding unconsciously to the measured presence I projected. Ryan attempted to interject at times, his voice carrying remnants of irritation and disbelief, but I responded with deliberate calm, factual observations and acknowledgement of his concerns, which neutralized any potential conflict and allowed the meeting to proceed in an atmosphere of civility, respect, and productive dialogue. As the hours passed, we reviewed responsibilities, clarified expectations, and established practical arrangements, each interaction reinforcing the legitimacy of my position and the cumulative effect of strategic observation, composed engagement, and consistent presence, demonstrating that influence and respect can be quietly but effectively asserted through patient and thoughtful action. The sunlight shifted through the windows, casting long, warm lines across the table and the faces of those gathered, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that the day's careful orchestration had transformed what could have been a tense confrontation into a space of measured understanding, validation, and acknowledgement, the subtle recalibration of authority now firmly in place. I reflected on the lessons reinforced through the interactions, understanding that dignity and influence are often conveyed in the small details, the attentiveness to gestures, the timing of responses, the modulation of voice, and the subtle management of presence, and that these elements collectively shape perception, recognition, and relationships in a lasting and meaningful way. By the time the meeting concluded, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Ryan's posture had softened, his earlier rigidity replaced with tentative acknowledgement. Margaret maintained a neutral but respectful demeanor, and other relatives had adjusted to a new rhythm of interaction that reflected both recognition and the subtle assertion of rightful authority, all without a single confrontation or raised voice, a testament to the power of composed, deliberate, and strategically observed engagement. Walking through the quiet streets on my way home, the soft afternoon light illuminating familiar landmarks, I felt the profound satisfaction of having navigated the complex terrain of family relationships with integrity, clarity, and calm presence, understanding that the cumulative effect of patience, observation, and strategic composure had not only addressed immediate tensions, but had also established a durable foundation of respect, recognition, and influence that would shape interactions for years to come, reinforcing that dignity and measured action often achieve outcomes far more enduring than confrontation or argument ever could, and that the careful cultivation of presence and strategic awareness remains a quiet but potent tool in shaping family dynamics and personal empowerment. The days that followed the resolution felt different, lighter in a way that I had not expected, as if the air itself had shifted to reflect the clarity and freedom I had reclaimed. And though the relationships with my family remained complex, I found a sense of peace in knowing that boundaries were established, respect was acknowledged, and my sense of self could no longer be compromised by the actions or expectations of others. Each morning I woke with a quiet intention, a renewed awareness of the value of my own presence, and I carried that mindfulness into every decision, understanding that true strength lies not in the approval of others, but in the integrity and autonomy we maintain in our hearts. From this journey, I learned the profound importance of trusting intuition, of honoring emotional and financial boundaries, and of recognizing that love and loyalty are not obligations imposed by others, but choices that flourish when nurtured with honesty and respect. To anyone listening who has felt cast aside, misunderstood, or betrayed, I want you to know that your worth is intrinsic and your path is valid. It is not defined by those who fail to see your value, but by your own courage, discernment, and commitment to self-respect. Take time to nurture yourself, to establish your own boundaries, to protect your heart and mind as carefully as you manage your finances, and trust that the universe, in its quiet wisdom, provides signs and guidance when you listen with attention and intention. Let this story remind you that healing is possible, that independence and clarity bring freedom, and that the strength to reclaim your life comes from within, from a place of calm awareness, patience, and unwavering self-belief. Be gentle with yourself, honor your instincts, and allow each day to affirm your growth, your resilience, and your capacity to create a life that reflects your true values, free from the shadows of others' expectations or misjudgments. Thank you for staying with me through this journey, for sharing in the moments of reflection, doubt, and eventual clarity. Your presence, even in silence, validates the courage it takes to stand in your own truth and find peace amidst the complexities of family and life. Emily Carter, 32, and the core lesson I want to share with you is: protect your boundaries and trust your own intuition.